migration over the years and what that means in the contemporary moment. And so that is what I want to try to entangle a little bit here. In fairness to the topic and in fairness to our people, this is just merely a scratching of the surface, a glimpse, a moment that we can kind of stimulate some ideas, and at the end of the evening, I'm really interested in hearing your feedback. I'm hoping that this will lead to yet another paper to write, et cetera, on this topic. So that's kind of my overview and my thinking on the topic. Give me a moment to log back on here. So, to outline what I want to cover tonight, and much of it was actually covered eloquently by Dr. Underwood, is I want to kind of let you know where I'm coming from on a personal level. So I'm going to, the academic word for that is autoethnographic context. Secondly, I want to go over some demographics that Faye Antala not too long ago went over on this campus. And then I want to spend more time with some of the theoretical ideas that will help us entangle and make sense of this complex phenomenon. And in doing that, we'll look at some of the historical contexts of Chamorro migration, and then we'll look at some of the more contemporary dynamics of Chamorro diaspora, and more specifically, what I'm interested in hearing, your thoughts on is educational diaspora, particularly in higher education. Okay. Now, myself as a diasporic Chamorro, my story is very familiar, very common among many of you. My father joined the military, straight out of high school. Went to the recruitment center and joined the Army. My mother also left with her eldest sister, who's in the audience, and went to Southern California, Long Beach area. And at some point down the road, that's where my parents met. And they had, I was born, firstborn, etc. So, as with many of your relatives, we found ourselves located in this, kind of foreign place in Long Beach, California, where a lot of Chamorros found themselves located in. So, as a diasporic Chamorro, our lives connected to the island were captured in memories, in information and artifacts sent from the island, in communication both ways, etc., through the years, and then of course for funerals and weddings, we traveled to and from Guam, through the years, and my cousins, came to the States as well, and so, that kind of captures this transnational mobility of a people, and again, I want to reiterate that it's not only physical, a one-way street or a two-way street, but it's symbolic, it's cultural, and it's multiple routes. Growing up in the States, the most salient experience I think that I was encountered with, and I learned a lot from my dad, was being perceived and being dealt with, so to speak, as a minority on the mainland. His experience was during the 60s, and so he was coming of age during a time in which racism in the South was still very entrenched. And so being a military officer, as many of you shared experience, segregation, Jim Crow was live and well in a de facto way, but the consequences were very vivid and real, okay? So he came of age during this time, and then I came of age during another time in which racial logic and racial identity took on a new life, but no less salient and no less consequential. And so I kind of came of age, during like the early hip hop, house party kinds of cultural movements, in which minority groups were articulating and expressing themselves through a beat and through a rhythm that was constructed at a local level, and it had this sense of urban authenticity. And then over the years, you see the popularity of hip-hop on the island for quite some time now. There's different versions of hip-hop, there's different versions of reggae music, and different diasporic groups have kind of appropriated hip-hop and appropriated music more generally to express their own experiences. And so this, again, is not a new phenomenon. It's simply part of a series of different appropriations of music, of politics, of culture, etc. So as a minority, quote-unquote minority on the U.S. mainland, when you're a member of a group who is small in number, yet has a Spanish surname, and racially, quote-unquote racially, kind of appears to be members of more larger recognizable groups, there is the contradiction of being a highly visible, invisible minority. And it is through that lens that has helped many of us try to make sense of who we are in terms of our ambivalence on the U.S. mainland in connection to our ancestral homeland. So that is the kind of the personal foundation that stimulated my academic ideas to pursue a broader and deeper understanding of myself and the sociological and cultural things at play. Now, some of the, very briefly, some of the theoretical underpinnings of my work and implicit in the presentation tonight is related to colonial and post-colonial theory. This is kind of the Sociology 101 part of the presentation for Dr. Johnson's students back there. You guys take notes, because I'm sure I'm going to write a question for your next exam. So this is the part. Colonial theory really captures the conditions of colonization. Here on Guam, the primary condition, I think, has to do with the cultural erosion of Chamorro culture as a result of subsequent stages and waves of colonization, and of course the ambiguity in our political status as a result of a colonial history. Post-colonial theory is more about the transcendence of those conditions and the transcendence of identities that have been imposed on colonized people. So part of the problem of colonization is not simply the politics and the hegemony, the cultural hegemony of colonization, but it also has to do with a history of colonizers, a history of people outside of your group having a monopoly on defining who you are. So the Chamorro story is part of the story of indigenous people. It's a case in point of the story of indigenous people who not only struggle politically, economically, socially, culturally, but struggle to have voice in simply answering the question of who I am in their own voice. And for those kinds of stories to resonate rather than being told who you are from the outside. And that is part of the colonial foundation of indigenous people in general. And so this term rearticulations is one of these college academic words that simply means when a group of people who have historically been disadvantaged at some point muster up the courage and the resilience to not only define themselves, but to empower themselves by appropriating colonial institutions to then define themselves and be listened to. And that is captured in the term rearticulation. And then finally, as a result of these broader historical things at play, there's very, very recent academic developments in Native American and indigenous studies. And in partly related to that, there is an emergence of what is referred to as Native Pacific studies that Vince Diaz and Kehaulani Kawanui kind of coined in their publication in the Contemporary Pacific, where they were guest editors and compiled together a number of works from different Pacific Islanders and kind of coined this term. And so, now we're at a point about 9-10 years later since the initial coining of that term, in which you have a real field that spans a number of universities and colleges and spans a number of academic disciplines. And then finally, diaspora studies is another kind of hot topic in the academic world, things that students are studying. And this topic runs the risk of, it's been described as being like the latest trend in academia. And Paul Spickard, who published, was one of the editors of Pacific Diaspora, cautions us that to not get kind of consumed and absorbed into the trendiness of academic discourse, but to